Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where we're going to be continuing to read Moby Dick. So, let's get going. Seeing now that but a very few moments more would give the Pequod's boats the advantage, and rather than be thus foiled of his game, Derrick chose to hazard what to him must have seemed a most unusually long dart, ere the last chance would forever escape. But no sooner did his harpooner stand up for the stroke, than all three tigers, Queequeg, Tashtego, Daggoo, instinctively sprang to their feet, and, standing in a diagonal row, simultaneously pointed their barbs, and darted over the head of the German harpooner. Their 3 Nantucket irons entered the whale, blinding vapours of foam and white fire. The 3 boats, in the first fury of the whale's headlong rush, bumped the Germans aside with such force that both Derrick and his baffled harpooner were spilled out and sailed over by the 3 flying keels. "Don't be afraid, my butterboxes," cried Stubb, casting a passing glance upon them as he shot by. "You'll all be picked up presently. All right. I saw some sharks astern. St. Bernard's dogs, you know. Relieve distressed travellers. Hurrah! This is the way to sail now. Every keel a sunbeam. Hurrah! Here we go like 3 tin kettles at the tail of a mad cougar. This puts me in mind of fastening to an elephant in a tilbury on a plain. Makes the wheel spokes fly, boys, when you fasten to him that way. And there's danger of being pitched out too when you strike a hill. Hurrah, this is the way a fellow feels when he's going to Davy Jones, all a rush down an endless incline plane. Hurrah, this whale carries the everlasting mail." But the monster's run was a brief one. Giving a sudden gasp, he tumultuously sounded. With a grating rush, the 3 lines flew round the loggerheads with such a force as to gouge deep grooves in them, while so fearful were the harpooneers that this rapid sounding would soon exhaust the lines, that using all their dexterous might, they caught repeated smoking turns with the rope to hold on, till at last, owing to the perpendicular strain from the lead-lined chocks of the boats, whence the 3 ropes went straight down into the blue, the gunwales of the bows were almost even with the water, while the 3 sterns tilted high in the air. And the whale soon ceasing to sound, for some time they remained in that attitude, fearful of expending more line, though the position was a little ticklish. But though boats have been taken down and lost in this way, yet it is this holding on, as it is called, this hooking up by the sharp barbs of his live flesh from the back, this it is that often torments the Leviathan into soon rising again to meet the sharp lance of his foes. Yet, not to speak of the peril of the thing, it is to be doubted whether this course is always the best, for it is but reasonable to presume that the longer the stricken whale stays under water, the more he is exhausted. Because, owing to the enormous surface of him, in a full-grown sperm whale something less than 2,000 square feet, the pressure of the water is immense. We all know what an astonishing atmospheric weight we ourselves stand up under, even here above ground, in the air. How vast, then, the burden of a whale, bearing on his back a column of 200 fathoms of ocean. It must at least equal the weight of 50 atmospheres. One whaleman has estimated it at the weight of 20 line of battleships, with all their guns and stores and men on board. As the 3 boats lay there, on that gently rolling sea, gazing down into its eternal blue noon, and as not a single groan or cry of any sort, nay, not so much as a ripple or a bubble, came up from its depths, what landsman would have thought that beneath all that silence and placidity, the utmost monster of the seas was writhing and wrenching in agony? Not 8 inches of perpendicular rope were visible at the bows. Seems it credible that by 3 such thin threads the Leviathan was suspended, like the big weight to an 8-day clock. Suspended, and to what? To 3 bits of board. Is this the creature of whom it was once so triumphantly said, Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? The sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold, the spear, the dart, nor the habergeon. He esteemeth iron as straw, the arrow cannot make him flee. Darts are counted as stubble. He laugheth at the shaking of a spear. This the creature. This he? Oh, that unfulfilments should follow the prophets. For with the strength of 1,000 thighs in his tail, Leviathan had run his head under the mountains of the sea, to hide him from the Pequod's fish spears. In that sloping afternoon sunlight, the shadows that the 3 boats sent down beneath the surface must have been long enough and broad enough to shade half Xerxes' army. Who can tell how appalling to the wounded whale must have been such huge phantoms flitting over his head? "Stand by, men, he stirs," cried Starbuck, as the 3 lines suddenly vibrated in the water, distinctly conducting upwards to them, as by magnetic wires, the life and death throbs of the whale, so that every oarsman felt them in his seat. The next moment, relieved in great part from the downward strain of the bows, the boats gave a sudden bounce upwards, as a small ice field will, when a dense herd of white bears are scared from it into the sea. Haul in, cried Starbuck again. He's rising. The lines of which, hardly an instant before, not 1 hand's breadth could have been gained, were now in long, quick coils flung back, all dripping into the boats, and soon the whale broke water within 2 ships' lengths of the hunters. His motions plainly denoted his extreme exhaustion. In most land animals there are certain valves or floodgates in many of their veins, whereby, when wounded, the blood is in some degree at least instantly shut off in certain directions. Not so with the whale, one of whose peculiarities it is to have an entire non-valvular structure of the blood vessels, so that when pierced even by so small a point as a harpoon, a deadly drain is at once begun upon his whole arterial system, and when this is heightened by the extraordinary pressure of water at great distance below the surface, his life may be said to pour from him in incessant streams. Yet so vast is the quantity of blood in him, and so distant and numerous its interior fountains, that he will keep thus bleeding and bleeding for a considerable period, even as in a drought a river will flow, whose source is in the well-springs of far-off and undiscernible hills. Even now, when the boats pulled upon this whale, and perilously drew over his swaying flukes, and the lances were darting into him, they were followed by steady jets from the new-made wound, which kept continually playing, while the natural spout-hole in his head was only at intervals, however rapid, sending its affrighted moisture into the air. From this last vent no blood came yet, because no vital part of him had thus far been struck. His life, as they significantly call it, was untouched. As the boats now more closely surrounded him, the whole upper part of his form, with much of it that is ordinarily submerged, was plainly revealed. His eyes, or rather the places where his eyes had been, were beheld, as strange misgrown masses gather in the knot-holes of the noblest oaks when prostrate, so from the points which the whale's eyes had once occupied, now protruded blind bulbs, horribly pitiable to see. But pity there was none. For all his old age and his one arm and his blind eyes, he must die the death and be murdered, in order to light the gay bridals and other merry-makings of men, and also to illuminate the solemn churches that preach unconditional inoffensiveness by all to all. Still rolling in his blood, at last he partially disclosed a strangely discoloured bunch, or protuberance, the size of a bushel, low down on the flank. "A nice spot," cried Flask. "Just let me prick him there once." "Avast," cried Starbuck. "There's no need of that." But humane Starbuck was too late. At the instant of the dart, an ulcerous jet shot from this cruel wound, and goaded by it into more than sufferable anguish, the whale, now spouting thick blood, with swift fury blindly darted at the craft, bespattering them and their glorying crews all over with showers of gore, capsizing Flask's boat and marring the bows. It was his death stroke. For, by this time, so spent was he by loss of blood, that he helplessly rolled away from the wreck he had made, lay panting on his side, impotently flapped with his stumped fin, then over and over slowly revolved like a waning world, turned up the white secrets of his belly, lay like a log, and died. It was most piteous, that last expiring spout, as when by unseen hands the water is gradually drawn off from some mighty fountain, and with half-stifled, melancholy gurglings, the spray column lowers and lowers to the ground. So the last long-dying spout of the whale. And with that, we're actually going to end it there, because we are now over the 10-minute mark. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.